Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hey, comics fam. Whether you are a longtime listener or a veteran catching the show today, all are welcome here. When we started this podcast, inclusion and diversity were at the forefront of what we wanted to cover and promote with it. So in June, we'll be celebrating Pride Month for our second year in a row, featuring an amazing group of queer creators and their projects. One of those projects is from our friends at Lifeline Comics. Following their success with By Visibility Still By, Herology, and Rainbow Canvas, Lifeline Comics is launching their newest queer anthology, Transphoria, a trans and non-binary anthology, on May the 30th. The 90-page graphic novel will contain 19 stories all about trans and non-binary experiences of gender euphoria, crossing all genres like slice of life, supernatural, romance, science fiction, anime, and beyond. Featuring a vibrant display of artistic styles and storytelling techniques, Transphoria is a testament to the creativity and talent of its contributors. From sci-fi striking stories to endearing romantic ventures, this graphic novel celebrates trans stories while delivering a powerful message of empowerment and affirmation. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check it out. As always, thanks for listening and have a glorious Pride Month helping us celebrate. Y'all, Jimmy, the Chaos Goblin, strikes again. I should have known better than to mention I was working on my DC Universe meets Ravenloft hybrid D&D campaign on social media. My bad. He goes and tags a bunch of comics creators we know, and now I have to get it in gear and whip this campaign into shape so we can start playing. Another friend chimes in, "Are you going to make maps?" It's fair to say it's been a while since I put something together, so I guess? It was then that I discovered Arkenforge. If you don't know who Arkenforge is, they have everything you need to make your TTRPG more fun and immersive, allowing you to build, play, and export animated maps, including in-person Fog of War capability that lets your players interact with maps as the adventure unfolds while you, the DM, get the full picture. Now I'm set to easily build high-res animated maps, saving myself precious time and significantly adding nuance to our campaign. That's a win every day in my book. Check them out at arkenforge.com and use the discount code YETI5 to get $5 off. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you, and big thanks to Arkenforge for partnering with our show. I think I'm going to make Jimmy play a Goblin Warlock just to get even. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for today's chat, and today I'm joined by a newcomer to our show, Dan Waters. I've been wanting to have Dan on for a while here. Dan's portfolio includes writing credits for Homesick Pilots, Loki, Lucifer, a personal favorite of mine, The Seasons Have Teeth, The Six Fingers that's going on currently, and the recently released Creature from the Black Lagoon, among others. And now he's turning his attention to help Skybound launch the Energon Universe, mashing up the worlds of classic G.I. Joe and Transformers franchises with Destro miniseries, which along with Scarlett kicks off the next phase of those book releases. Dan, welcome to the show. You having a good week?
I am. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah. Well, I know you've been busy promoting the next installment of the Universal Monsters comic franchise with Image, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is in shops now. I don't want to recover a lot of ground there, except to ask, how feedback been for the series thus far. I really enjoyed the first issue, and I wasn't previously like a big fan of the creature.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's what we've been hearing a lot. I think it's been a bigger reaction than I honestly expected. Dracula's one thing, The Creature from the Black Lagoon is very much another.
Right.
But it turns out there are a lot of sort of quiet, covert creature fans out there, hopefully we've made some new ones. It certainly seems like it.
Yeah, I was very, very young when I was first exposed to the movie, but not a big fan, but I really like the direction you're taking it in. Yeah. So Destro, I was recently chatting with Kelly Thompson about Scarlett, which is kind of the parallel sister series to Destro. Kind of about growing up with the character. And for those of us at a certain age in the US, it's kind of difficult to evade an imprint, at least at a cursory level, from the G.I. Joe and Transformers franchises. Growing up in London, was it something you were readily exposed to?
Nah, not at all. We had we had a thing called Action Man,
okay.
Which was I only know this in retrospect. There was when they brought G.I. Joe to the UK, they were like, well, real American hero might not fly the same. So
Yeah.
they rebranded it as Action Force and used a lot of the same characters, but sort of repurposed them in different roles. But by the time I was a kid, it was a thing called Action Man, which was far more of like a Ken doll kind of size thing with like a scar on his face, and it was very like James Bond geared
Okay.
or sort of coded. Um, and I love that as a kid. I'm surprised by how much I've ended up talking about Action Man in my adult professional life, and this sort of launch of this book. But yeah, GI Joe wasn't something that was particularly on my radar. So I think I've come come to it from a very different perspective to pretty much everyone or all the other writers I've talked to who've been working on this Energon stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm frankly delighted that you got recruited on this because there's definitely a different filter you can bring to the table. That as opposed to this iconically American filter, right? Kind of as an outsider, and I don't mean that in a bad or derogatory way. Kind of
Yeah.
as a work for hire gig. How did they approach you? How did you get involved?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, I think it was because I was already working on Creature,
Yeah.
um, and I think I was sort of brought up in conversation um, between the editors and Josh Williamson, and they liked the idea of putting me on this. I have a history of writing sort of megalomaniacs and sort of very entitled sociopaths. I did Lucifer, and the first superhero book I ever did was Ocean Master, like a one shot, and then Loki, and all these sort of very powerful, very entitled characters. So I can see why I might have come up in conversation about Destro. But I think there's something about it that works because he's not American either.
Yeah, exactly. Well, is writing, the characters that are classically seen as villains just something that's more appealing to you? Lucifer, Loki, Azrael even is an anti-hero, right? And now Destro.
Yeah, I mean, I do love writing them. I like writing the heroes as well. I guess I have a sort of healthy British skepticism towards the sort of concept of the hero,
Okay.
which I think sort of bleeds through from the sort of comics that we grew up with over here, the sort of homegrown stuff.
Yeah.
All the 2000 AD, and then the sort of the writers that we look to, very quickly are the sort of the Moores and the Morrisons and all those kind of writers who came up through um, that same with that same foundation. But I do love writing villains. They're a lot of fun, and I think there's I get asked like sometimes like, oh, is it hard making them empathetic? And I don't think it ever is because I think there's an element of wish fulfillment when we read a villain's book.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also I'm not convinced that a character has to be particularly likable to be engaging. Um, like everyone sort of I think knows by this point that a flat villain who's just sort of out to rule the world for no reason doesn't cut mustard
Yeah.
for readers or audiences because we're all a bit more emotionally intelligent than that to think that those people really exist. Um, but we are bombarded every day, like in the news and everything, by these sort of maniacs who are running all our countries and
Yeah.
controlling everything. And they do have their own motivations. None of them are out just to rule the world for the sake of it, but it's not that far off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Skybound was kind enough to send me a review copy yesterday of Destro. That's very much on the front end of production, no colors yet. And I gotta say, it's pretty intense. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it's hard for me to escape comparing him to the Andrew Nichol film, The Lord of War, with like Nicolas Cage.
Mm.
He's always got this kind of above it all, kind of persona, as he's just operating on a different level as that international arms dealer while vamping out, in that plunging black suit with the high necked red collar, like rocking the family jewel and the red one to clarify. Um, it's a great character to play with, and honestly, that like GI Joe and the Cobra characters are pretty WWE when you think about it, like with these code names and costumes. So, like, were there other media analogs that kind of influenced you coming from, like a new perspective to this character?
I think there was kind of a, like you say, like Lord of War, like that's based on an amalgamation of true stories.
Right.
And I think so trying to sort of ground it to a certain aspect, bearing in mind this is also a world with Transformers falling out of the sky.
Yeah.
But trying to ground it to a certain aspect, and just the idea that he's part of this lineage that's kind of always controlled the world through the distribution of arms, I think is something that's a very juicy concept to sort of get your teeth into. And I think there is like the more I sort of looked into the characters, again, I wasn't super familiar before I was approached for this. And I was up front with Skybound about that as well. I was like, I don't know anything yet. And they were like, no, that's great, that's fine. We're starting from the ground up.
Yeah.
So you're sort of free to sort of discover what you want. And they gave me some sort of directions to look in, and the show and the comics, Larry Hama comics and things like good ones to look at. But what sort of struck me was that he does have this sort of capital R romantic element to him. He is like pro wrestling Dracula, and this sort of thing, but he also has this sort of very toxic romantic edge and this sort of isolation. So that was definitely something that I wanted to make sure was also present in the book.
Okay. Well, there's been a fair bit of creative license, utilized to thread the Energon universe together. It looks like we're staying reasonably close to his established origins. He's the man behind Mars, or the Military Armament Research Syndicate. A state-of-the-art weapons manufacturer, now in loose alliance with the formerly formed, if fledgling, Cobra organization as of Cobra number 5. The first issue of Scarlett, kind of stayed a bit away from the bigger timelines, but this one definitely seems a little more embedded, as it was into Duke and Cobra Commander. What kind of restrictions were you given with respect to filling in the world, if any?
I don't know if it was so much about restrictions, more about the idea that these books are building blocks.
Okay.
In sort of creating this world. So that was a sort of note I started off with. But that really works for where we're at. And it was obviously some thought had gone into why a Destro book and why now. So something quite easy to sort of slip into. Because yes, the sort of events of Duke and Cobra Commander have sort of tilted the world's axis a little bit in terms of power structures and or at least what can be sort of seen approaching. So where Destro sees that sort of coming, because that's what he's always done, what his family's always done, to stay ahead of the curve, to sort of make sure they're on top of the most recent advancements in warfare, so they can always be the ones with them all in pocket and sell them to everyone else. But now it's changing, and he's kind of out of the loop, and that's stuff that's all been very naturally set up in those 2 books. So really, the story kind of has to tie into them quite a lot, because that's exactly where he finds himself now. And this book is essentially the grab for power when he sees the world changing.
Yeah, I mean, it was really that familial connection and the way it played out. Kind of surprised. He talked about that legacy in Duke, and we kind of get a preview of the coup in Darklonia. That small Central European country, and canon has that as ruled by his cousin. Obviously, in the Energon universe, in this iteration, things can change. But that family dynamic was surprising. You talked about him being kind of Scottish royalty anyway. And rotten royalty, right? That's got to be something really fun to play with as an Englishman, I would.
Yeah, I mean, he's a laird, so like close to a lord than sort of a monarch. He's a monarch in his own right in terms of Mars and how he sort of behaves on the global stage. Sort of power behind the throne, I think, is maybe a little closer. But yeah, I mean, it's the fact that he's Scottish definitely gives me a certain in. Being sort of British Isles based.
All right, let's take a quick break. Hey Comics fam, indie comic book publisher Band of Bars just got a level up and announced it is now a cooperative. This heralds a new era for them, including a partnership with Dauntless Stories. And they added several new members to the ownership group. Marcus Jimenez is now Chief Operating Officer, Brent Fisher takes on the role of Chief Diversity Officer, and Joey Galvez is introduced as Head of Kickstarter Ops and Social Media Manager, which is sure to increase their capabilities overall as a publisher. And it further promotes their mission statement of advancing representation, inclusion, and diversity in the media. They also established a new board of directors to help chart the new path of their journey. With new projects in the works like Alas Goodbye dropping in June, Unbroken soon launching on Kickstarter, and Pawn coming up with Dauntless, stay tuned to this space for more exciting news from the growing Bards family. Let's get back to the show.
Most work for hire stuff doesn't have this much of an immersive universe already, kind of stocked and layered in. And it seems like a very natural collaborative extension, kind of not unlike working at Marvel, where you're kind of given a character and it has if you want to pick somebody else to throw in there, everything is evaluated by an editor. And it seems like also, an analog to kind of what you're doing with exploring these overlapping narratives with Rom on One Hand, Six Fingers project. Did it feel like an immediate fit for you, or did you have to do a bunch of like background research and go back and read like Larry Hama's stuff or?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had to do all that, but that's also just, that's part of doing your job.
Right.
And it's always a pretty exciting part, especially with something like this, where the sort of brief is that, you have this sort of all this raw material and you have these different continuities ready and you're helping build a new one. So rather than sort of everything being canonically set in stone, it's more like here is a load of stuff other people have done that you can pick and choose from, and you can sort of mine for ideas and for content.
Yeah.
And sort of put it together in a new configuration. Like that's a very appealing thing as a creator.
Yeah, I would imagine so. One of the things that I've always found fascinating about Destro is kind of the emotive nature of his helmet, which in ways has always sort of vexed me, right? And it wasn't as rigid in this iteration, but by contrast, what made Cobra Commander always so sinister was never getting to see his face, right? And the bats are more terrifying and robotic with their, kind of reflective metallic countenance, right? Here's he's infused with like a lot of emotive range, especially more than a blank mask would. And it makes him more human and relatable, and kind of in a way, honestly, that's more frightening. Because for me, in my read, right, the shiny mask is this mechanism that forces the reader to kind of uncomfortably examine how they might similarly react in similar circumstances. So how did you want to play that? Has that just always been something with the mask? Hey, we're not going to make him this like solid, rigid character, because in ways he could be much more scary with that.
Yeah, I think. I mean, yeah, I think there's a bit of a creative license to how the sort of mask / helmet kind of emotes. It's a bit in sort of Green Goblin territory.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I don't. To be honest, I don't remember any particular discussion about it. I think that's generally how he's been portrayed.
It is, yeah.
In the sort of like animated show and things. And yes, there is there is something to having a non-emotive face, but I also think a big appeal of Destro is that he's enjoying himself a lot of the time.
Okay.
And like, yeah, I think you need to like see him being smug.
Gotcha.
And that works a lot better with his face on show.
Yeah. I mean, the look is still very, very classic, and I really appreciate keeping the classic fist rockets in, because I can't wait to see him go all Boba Fett at some point. That's going to be great.
It's coming.
Okay, awesome. Well, and I can also already see the kind of the conflict between him and Cobra Commander brewing. I've always considered Destro as kind of a very principled individual, and even if his moral compass is a bit broken. He's orderly and methodical, whereas Cobra Commander is like a chaos goblin. So it's fascinating to see how Joshua Williamson set up the Cobra organization, right? Because it's far less militaristic from the jump, kind of recruiting what looks like a ragtag mercenary militia, at least for now. And maybe we'll get, uniforms later, but I can't imagine, this is Destro's idea of a proper organization. He's all structure. So is that perceived butting of heads between the two on my part going to be part of the larger narrative here?
Yeah, and I think even without giving too much away, I think even the fact that Cobra kind of needs structure and it needs bodies is something that's going to come into play. The sort of main antagonists for Destro in the book are Tomax and Zammot,
Yeah.
the Crimson Twins, and they are trainers of mercenaries. So there's a sort of they all have things each other want or each other need, and I think that's kind of always been the heart of the sort of conflict within Cobra. It's interesting to have those sort of those two pillars. You've got GI Joe, who are the good guys and they're soldiers, and you've got Cobra and they're the bad guys and they are crazy snake people. But you've always kind of had this third pillar in Destro, in that he's very in the Cobra camp, but he doesn't have the same agendas as Cobra Commander.
Right.
He's always kind of got his own priorities. And I think that just makes the whole thing just that little more flavorful.
Yeah. I mean, I know that self-interest is kind of a primary motivation for him, but I was sort of surprised because compared to Tomax and Zaymot, he's like the normal one. Um, you, and I'm curious about how the character rollouts happen there. Because the Crimson Twins, was that something you had inherited from the jump, or did you say, please give me the psychopaths because I like writing psychopaths?
No, that was actually in the brief. They wanted to
Okay.
bring them in at this point, but they are, they're a very like interesting foil for him. But that was something I looked at without getting into the sort of too much of the weeds of process, but sort of going like, okay, like they are they are business people. They are also these very smart um, leaders of an organization who would like to rule the world. So where is the real jarring differences between them and Destro? And
Okay.
sort of that was the place that I had to look to make sure that it wasn't just two equal opposing forces, that they
Gotcha.
had like very distinct sort of priorities and um, motives, and also sort of how they go about things is different. Um, but yeah, I spent a lot of time writing the sort of introduction scene with them, because I wanted to make sure they came in sort of in a harrowing and terrible way, which wasn't even about showing that they are worse than Destro, because I don't think they need to be, and I don't think they are either. I don't want to flatten Destro at all,
Okay.
or sort of tone him down because he's the protagonist of the book. It's not a thing of, oh, he's suddenly doing it all because he has like a sick daughter, or anything like that. It's like, no, 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 he's still a piece of shit.
Okay.
Um, which was something I've sort of always tried to do, like writing things like Lucifer and things like that. Like if I'm going to write a character who's the devil, and Destro really is another kind of devil, um, they've got to be the devil. They can't be. You can't start toning it down just because they're the lead and you want people to like them.
Well, good, because I thought you were going to make me feel sympathy for him, Dan, and I was going to be like, no, I adore hating corporate fat rats pulling the strings behind the global economic curtain, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you can understand why he's doing what he's doing, but you should not agree with it.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good. Well, kind of as an American talking to a British cat, and without getting too much into global politics or too many complex geopolitical issues, you know, you can really kind of fuck with Americans' heads right now, right? Because we have the January 6th Capitol riots, which are still fresh in our consciousness, and Cobra's recruiting militia members, which is like frighteningly topical here right now in the states. Add to that the guilt I'm personally dealing with as a citizen of a country providing armed conflicts, arms conflicts across the globe. that's some pretty fertile ground to play with. And I honestly really was surprised because I had no clue when I started reading GI Joe again that it would feel this material, this strong and topical to what we're dealing with currently.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard not to when you're dealing with you know these are people who sell bombs and machine guns. It's
Yeah,
it's a it's a very real thing, and the UK is no less culpable in providing armaments than the US, particularly right now. Um, I think what is it? The US, the UK, and France are the world's three biggest arms dealers.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, it's very on my mind as well. But you want to put some of that in the book, but you also don't want to feel like you're trivializing it or minimizing it either. So
yeah.
it's a tightrope.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a balance. But I really appreciate that because I didn't, I guess, anticipate going in feeling as emotionally pulled by GI Joe and the Transformers. Like because I have that filter and it's so strong from being a kid, that being an adult and resonating to it in a very very different way is it's fascinating. And, I'm having to
Yeah,
process it.
it's interesting. I think there's also a thing where we are sort of as the world changes and as sort of what we see and what is sort of shown to us via both news networks and social media. People have different opinions on things now, and they come to them with like quite strong lenses. You're sort of saying about like talking with Americans, like the one of the weirdest experiences or reactions I've had to the story was writing I did a story with John Paul Leon for uh, Batman Secret Files, and it was featuring a character that James Tynion had created called Gunsmith, and it was Batman versus Gunsmith. Um, and I got yelled at on Twitter by some guy who was yelling about the woke agenda that I'd
Yeah,
brought into this comic by having Batman be anti-gun, which in my understanding is a pretty fundamental
yeah,
element
yeah.
of the character.
Yep. Well, it was wild because I was actually listening to you talk about people and going nuts about things. I was listening to a recent episode of Matthew Rosenberg's podcast, "Ideas Don't Bleed," that you were a guest on.
Mhm.
And it's funny because you liken yourself to being the Cannibal Corpse, like for some comics readers, and I don't know, it just struck in my head. And I'm taking it
I
completely
don't
out of
remember saying
context.
that at all.
Well, it was hilarious because I think you were talking about it being associated with coffin bound, right? But but
Right. Yeah.
but given the analogy and the emotional depths, you're kind of plumbing with these characters and stuff, which I greatly enjoyed, by the way. Where does that come from? Do
Thank
you
you.
feel like you just make people feel uncomfortable as a writer in general?
Hopefully in the right ways, generally speaking. I don't know. I think um my sort of um entry point to sort of genre stuff like when people start talking about like Star Trek or whatever, I can't join in the conversation. I zone out. It just doesn't do anything for me. It never really
Okay.
has. Um, other than some of it being, penned by Harlan Ellison. But like I came from horror. Horror was entirely my sort of point of entry, and I don't really think of myself as a horror writer, like specifically.
Okay.
But I think it does. I think it has sort of maybe warped me to a certain extent. And I've always been interested in sort of like transgressive books and transgressive literature, like the sort of comic that's lit a fire under me in the last like sort of year or two is Lovesick by Luana Becchio. And
Okay.
I just think things that sort of push boundaries in some direction or other always speak to me because it always feels that little bit more revolutionary than sort of treading safer ground. But it's not like the only thing I look for or try and create. It's just sometimes I'll be a little surprised by eliciting this reaction. So it's not a conscious thing. Those people sort of saying that they couldn't look at pages of Coffin Bound, and I was quite surprised by that because especially working with Danny, I kind of thought we'd have a little more leeway because her art is so stylized. It's not like it's hyper realistic gore or anything. It's all black marker on white paper, but um, people felt very viscerally about it, which is a good thing in the end, I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, and I think we all need to take responsibility for our filters that we bring into books too. Especially horror.
Mm.
I was having a discussion because I read Spectrograph recently,
Hmm.
and the without giving a whole bunch of stuff away for people who haven't read it before, the childhood trauma that was in that was simply too much for me. Right, my wife is a
Mm.
trauma psychologist. We live in the trauma world. We get exposed to it a lot. So I think it's fine to be like, hey, I recognize how good this is, but it's just simply not for me, and that's okay. You know, I think fandom just needs to take responsibility for itself a little bit more, and be mature about it. But okay,
Yeah,
I'm
I,
gonna
th- I
skip.
think, and I think a lot of the time, when people are asking for sort of content warnings and things, like that's really what they're asking for.
Yeah,
Is sort of just like a bit of forewarning so that they can. It's not about policing what's in the work. It's about wanting to just know ahead of time, and there's different opinions on that, and where that's appropriate and isn't. Um, but yeah, I don't think anything should be off topic, or off the table. Any topic should be off the table. But I also do think there's um, I also don't even necessarily know that art has a responsibility in any specific way. Specific works can have specific responsibilities, but art in itself doesn't. But I also think when people sort of go in uninformed, or are writing sort of outside their sort of stories to tell, as people sort of say it. Most of the time, just what you get is flat and boring,
yeah.
because it doesn't tap into anything. And I think that's a better thing to keep in mind. Because yes, sort of these same old stories that don't really tap into anything, but are trying to sort of capitalize on other people's trauma or other people's experiences. They never work, and they're never good. They're just noise.
So how do you to circle back? How do you bring that personal ethos into Destro?
Oh boy. Well, having never been an international arms dealer, um, I guess it's more about I guess it's more about sort of like warped perspectives, and sort of uh, cruelty. I think is a big part of it as well.
Okay.
Sort of um, everyone sort of trying to get one over on each other, and sort of come out on top. And I think everyone has worked with people like that. Everyone has known people like that. And that's really kind of what the book's about. In the end, it's about these people who kind of hate each other, but trying to utilize each other, and having to make compromises. People have to make these huge compromises in the book, without giving too much away, on their ethics and on achieving their goals, to sort of keep things stable.
Well, total aside here, but I'm frankly tired of interviewing people who have rock star hair. And for people who don't know, Dan, you have rock star hair. I'm wondering how Alex Packnadal feels about the one in the White Noise Collective that doesn't have amazing hair. And I need to speak up for my fellow bald guys here, right? Because there needs to be like an Eisner for best hair in comics, and Rom would win hands down, I think,
Yeah,
for
that's
for
fair.
sure.
Yeah, that's
Well,
fair. And Ron's got 10 years on me as well, so
what? That's ridiculous. Well, we touched on Creature a little bit, touching on other projects before we wrap up. One Hand, Six Fingers books, where you're writing another bent character here. This time it's a serial killer. And issue
Mhm.
4 drops the end of May. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what else you got coming up? I think you're writing a Doctor Who thing with Titan. that correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm writing the new 15th Doctor comic. We sort of started it with the free comic book day issue, which I think everyone can download for free on Kindle or whatever your preferred digital comics medium is. And that's I think we're doing 4 issues on top of that, starting in June. That's been a lot of fun. That feels like a sort of uh, a feather in my cap as a sort of British genre writer
Sure.
to get to write some Doctor Who, following in a lot of footsteps of people I admire and know. Because having said what I said about Star Trek, Doctor Who has always worked for me because it's the ultimate. It's lasted so long because it's just it's an almost perfect storytelling device. It's a person who can go anywhere at any time and generally wants to help, and that device on its own lets you tell like an unlimited amount of stories.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, where can people find you online?
I'm at Dan PG Waters on basically everywhere you would care to find me. I stick to the same handle.
Okay. And do we have a definitive drop day for Destro yet?
Yes, I believe it's August 17th.
Oh, it's in August now. I thought it was much earlier than that.
Oh,
Okay,
I might
but
be way off. No, you're right because it's going to print now. 19th of June. I was way off.
Okay. That's more what I align with what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know you can't speak to such things, but I really do hope you get Firefly because I absolutely love that character. So, yeah. And I've been really impressed with all the Energon Universe books thus far. This one's no exception. They all manage to feel kind of simultaneously independent while still cohesively knitting together these seemingly very disparate pieces. So make sure to pick it up. Don't tell anyone, but this one very much might turn out to be my favorite of the lot. And one of the things that I've been really surprised with is the talk of with amongst shop owners that I've been chatting with is how many new readers that this is actually pulling in. Because initially I thought it would just be hitting the demographic pocket of me, right? But apparently younger people are jumping in on Transformers and GI Joe as a bandwagon for the first time. So it's bringing people in. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's always very lovely to hear. That's always kind of the goal.
Yeah. Well, thanks for stopping in to talk with me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks very much for having me, Byron.
Yeah. Well, this is Byron O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.
This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we are doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner, maybe you would enjoy our sister podcast, Into the Comics Cave. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.